I'm Kate Masters for the Frederick News Post, and this is Beyond the Ballot, a series of in-depth interviews with all your elected officials for 2018. And this morning I'm here with Jan Gardner, who is just about to start her second term as Frederick County Executive. How are you, Jan?
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, my pleasure. And just to start off, I wanted to know a little bit more about you, so tell me about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a rural area in western Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So my parents still live in the same house I grew up in. So I left a town to go to college. I went to the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana for my undergraduate degree. Coming out of college, I got a job working for the Quaker Oats Company.
Oh, okay.
And I worked for the Quaker Oats Company in outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where they had a big distribution center and a manufacturing plant. And then I ultimately ended up in the corporate offices in Chicago. So I lived there for a while. I got married to somebody I met at Quaker Oats, to my husband, John. We've been married for 35 years. And we've lived a few other places as well in the country, mostly in the East or the Midwest. And we intentionally moved to Frederick County in 1991. And we moved here because we wanted to be close to our families. My husband actually has family that has roots here in Frederick County, and I have family in Pennsylvania, and he has family in New England, so we were relatively close to everybody. There's lots of job opportunities here, which was important, and of course we came here for good schools for our kids.
Sure. And how far away is your hometown from Frederick?
That's about a 5-hour drive.
Okay.
So it's not too far.
Okay, not too bad.
And you know, my parents are still living. My dad is 90, my mom's 89.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, they'll be here for the Christmas holiday. So I'm very fortunate to have my parents living and have my parents be in good health.
Oh, sure, sure. And what did you study at Notre Dame?
I have a degree in finance and economics. So I was in one of the first classes of women because Notre Dame was traditionally all male. And so as a business major, most of my classes, I was the only woman in my classes. So it was a little bit different then than it is today. So now I'm sure half the population or more of the college makeup are women. So that was a little bit different. And then when I first started at Quaker Oats, I was in manufacturing, and there weren't really very many women in manufacturing either. So I've done a lot of jobs in my life where I've kind of been the first woman to do it. Yeah,
that's very interesting. And what does manufacturing at Quaker Oats entail?
Well, I worked at a food plant that made cereal, made Aunt Jemima syrup, and a variety of food products. But Quaker Oats is largely a cereal company. They also made granola bars.
Okay. Good to know. And when you first moved to Frederick in the 90s, what was your first impression of the county and the area?
Well, I love Frederick County. We chose for Frederick County to be our home, and you know, I've always been interested in education and making sure my children would have a good place to grow up, and great schools was always a fundamentally important part of that. All 3 of my children graduated from Frederick County Public Schools. My 3 children are now adults, and so and they all had a wonderful experience and a wonderful education here. And it's really a place where we found community. You know, there's a lot of sense of belonging and community here. It's a very caring community. And I became involved in a much greater way than I ever thought that I would.
And that's actually a great lead up to my sort of first real political question, because I was reading a 1998 article announcing your run for county commissioner.
Right.
And in the article, it said that you had been dubbed a mommy monger.
Yeah, I hated that, actually.
And what does that mean?
Well, I quite innocently got involved in public speaking, primarily about school overcrowding, but about some land use issues as well. And the first meeting I went to was actually a planning commission meeting, and I took my youngest child with me. I mean, I had her on my hip. And the planning commission members clearly listened and heard what I had to say, and they wrapped some of what I had to add into their decision. And I felt really empowered by that. I thought, wow, this was really worth coming to. They listened to me. I've affected some change. And so I kind of got hooked. And so I started speaking on school overcrowding issues, and I met several other women who I've become friends with. One of them is Donna Kazumchek, who's now a city alderman. Another one is Val Dale, who ran for delegate at one time in District 4. And of course, she's been known to be a big education advocate as well. And we really talked about having a school adequate public facilities ordinance. And so I met them actually in a hearing room. So we were speaking on the same thing in different parts of the county. And I actually found myself speaking on broader issues rather than narrower issues. So I started with my kids' schools and I kind of went countywide. And so that's really how I got involved. And I really did feel that as an average citizen, I could participate and make a difference. And that's one of the things that I have valued throughout my career, is making sure that people can participate and shape the future of the county.
Sure. And you kind of cringed a little bit when you heard the term, and I mean, how did you feel about that?
So the developers in the room who, and their land use attorneys, dubbed us the mommy mongers. And I found that to be offensive at the time, because they were saying, look, there are these moms coming in, what do they know? And it was meant to be a bit derogatory. But we came to own it. And the Frederick News Post actually did a front page article about us, and it was titled Democracy in Action. And I really feel like that's what we were doing. And we were moms, and there's the saying that goes, if the moms aren't happy, nobody's happy. And that's kind of applied to that situation as well. But we always strove to do our homework and to be professional and to speak to the actual issues and to speak within the context of the law. And so we considered ourselves to be, to meaningfully participate in the process. So, but the development community and the people that were often in the room were always interested in finding out what we were going to say.
Sure. And when you ran for commissioner in '98, was that your first foray into politics?
Oh yes. I never thought I would get involved in politics, but because I was out there public speaking, and I became known through PTA channels around the county because I became the legislative chair for County Council PTA. I really had a good system of people who knew what I was working on and engaged in it at the time. And somebody suggested that I run for office. It was actually one of the Planning Commission members. And I thought, oh, I don't know that I want to do that. That's kind of a crazy thought. But then it grew on me, and I decided if I really wanted to affect change, the best thing I could do was actually have the power of the vote.
Sure. And then, of course, you ran you won your campaign in '98, and you became a county commissioner.
Yes.
And you were one of 2 women on the board at the time.
Yes.
So there was some representation, but I was wondering if being a woman in Frederick County politics at the time still felt new or different.
I think it did feel new, and it's different than it is today. So the other woman was Alona Hogan, and she, of course, did not finish out the term. She left for an employment reason. But when I was out knocking on doors and campaigning in that election, I had a lot of people tell me I should be staying home with my kids and I shouldn't be running for office. And you would never have anybody ask you that today. And I was actually on WFMD for an interview, and I got asked that by someone who is still there, I might add. And, how are you going to take care of your kids and do this job? And I said, the same way every other working woman, balances work and family. And so I said, are you going to ask the men all this question? And because they weren't asking any of the men those questions at the time. So, but I've always felt that the people that I worked with always treated me as an equal. I never felt that I was diminished in any way working, with the other members of the county commission throughout the years. Because on many years, I was the only woman who was a member of the county commissioners, and I have always been asked why aren't more people involved, and it used to be because we had fewer women who would run. And so, if women don't run, they obviously can't get elected. So now we have more women running, and I do think people will vote for women and view women as competent and capable to do any kind of leadership job.
And do you view yourself as a trailblazer in Frederick County, at least?
I often don't really think of it that way. So I suppose in some ways that's true. I'm probably most proud of being the first county executive who happens also to be a woman. So I'm very proud to be the first county executive. I think that's very historic, very meaningful, and I think I've been able to set up good public processes, good internal processes for charter government to be functional and to deliver good government to people in the community.
Sure. And going back to '98, I think that right out of the gate, it's fair to say that you were pretty bullish on development. That was one of your big issues. And why at the time did you think that that was such a big issue?
Well, we had a lot of school overcrowding back then, and we actually had about half of our schools over 100% of capacity. And we established way back in that point of time this goal to have schools at 90% system-wide. Because if schools were at 100% system-wide, by definition that meant half of them were overcrowded and half of them were undercrowded. So we set out to build schools, and over a decade we built the needed schools. We really built a lot of schools between 2000 and 2010, including several high schools. And we put in place a strong APFO, and we developed a good land use plan. So when I left in 2010, we did not have any serious overcrowding. Schools had system-wide, were at 90%. We did have a few schools over 100%, but they, again, were not seriously overcrowded. And we had good public policy in place and a good land use plan in place. And I really felt that after that decade, that I had achieved a lot of the things I set out to do way back in 1998. And so I didn't run for office. I had been the president of the county commissioners. I was at the top of my game, and I thought it was the right time to step out and give somebody else an opportunity to run.
Okay.
Most of the things that we accomplished in that decade were undone between 2010 and 2014. Massive amounts of development were approved without regard for schools and roads, and we're going to pay the price for that for the next 20 years. And so I'm back to correct some of the problems, and hopefully we can put in place policy that cannot be so readily undone. And I do feel like you know, we had accomplished a lot over that period of time, and we went backwards with giant steps in a short period of time.
Yeah, and we'll of course touch on that period a little bit later.
Okay.
But I also wanted to ask, even early in your career, I think that sometimes slow growth became controversial. And I'm thinking specifically of a decision almost 20 years ago where the Board of Commissioners denied the construction of a mosque on New Design Road.
We actually did not deny construction of a mosque on New Design Road, so that's actually wrong. What we denied was a connection to public water and sewer, okay? Because we allow houses of worship anywhere in the county, in any zone, including on that property, including in ag. So that was approved to be built. The issue was whether they could connect to a denied access water and sewer line.
Right.
So they could have built there on well and septic.
And I know the controversy at the time, which is something that the News Post covered extensively, was that that property had actually been approved to enter the water and sewer system by a previous commission for a baseball camp.
Well, it had, but the water and sewer had changed from plan, and actually the infrastructure that was going to support that camp was never built. So if you look at the infrastructure, it was not there. And what remained was denied access, because we have built, actually after that, we built a new water line to the Potomac River. But the water and sewer lines that we built that are transmission lines, they're denied access everywhere in the county. And there's a lot of implications for growth as well as public health with tapping into denied access transmission lines.
And at the time, I mean, you were getting a lot of heat for that, and it was something, you know, even Jim Meacham, who was a columnist here, I mean, even described the denial as Nazism. So I was wondering, I mean, what was your thinking back then? Was it stressful for you?
Of course. Now, I will say that I have a good relationship with the Muslim community here in Frederick County, and so we've moved past that. And I just think it was misrepresented, and quite frankly, I think it was misrepresented in the news. I mean, what you've just told me, that we denied a mosque, is dead wrong.
Okay. And for you at the time, why was the project such a no-go?
It wasn't a no-go. It was just a water and sewer connection. Because if you allow access to denied access line between here and the Potomac River, you open up development all the way down, and you really open up development in ag land. It's not consistent with your plan. And it's not consistent with our water and sewer plan. Had it been approved, it may have been denied by MDE, because all these connections not only are approved locally, they're approved by the state.
Okay.
Okay, so it probably would, if the county commissioners had voted for it, it probably would have been denied by the state.
Okay.
Because they don't allow connections to denied access lines. It's like putting a driveway on an interstate. you know, it's a bad thing to do, okay, because you're merging high traffic with a small entrance, and it's the same kind of thing with a transmission line that's like 3 feet wide, you know, and it's pumping water at high speed or sewer one way or the other. You just don't, you know, you have to have step-down connections to that. So you don't really ever allow direct connections. So that was a technical issue, and that was turned into something that it was not.
Okay.
And that happens a lot.
And in your 12 years as commissioner, how are you able to build up infrastructure in Frederick County? Because I know that, you know, you're not totally against growth. You support slow growth and slow development.
Well, I support well-managed growth and development. I mean, the county is going to grow. We have adopted comp plans that I have voted for that have had some growth in it. But I do think we have to be wise about it. People expect us to make sure that we have roads and school and public safety that is timed to support that development. And we've had a real back and forth in Frederick County where we've done something well and then we've undone it, we've gone back and fixed it, and then we've gone back and ruined it again. So we need to stop doing that cycle over and over again.
And we touched on one of the most controversial decisions early in your career, but in your previous or your following years as a commissioner, what were some of the hardest issues you had to tackle?
Well, right now I think one of our hardest issues is trying to figure out how to deal with the heroin and opioid addiction issue. I think that's a really difficult issue. I think dealing with the road congestion on US 15 and I-270 are really issues that we're often tasked with at county government, but they're state and federal issues. And so I would say during this campaign at almost every single debate, I was asked what was I going to do about I-270. And I would say, well, the county government, it's not a county road, it's a state and federal road, and you really need to hold your state and federal delegation responsible for that. And so, and ask them that question when you have a candidate for them. And so we have a lot of people asking a different level of government. So, you know, we have a $600 million operating budget in the county, and these projects are multi-billion-dollar projects. And so they're not something the county can ever afford to do. So it's really coordination with the state and federal level, and really making sure, you know, we have Congress reauthorize a transportation bill that has money in it.
Right. And you mentioned 270, and I mean, though it's not a county issue, would you support delegates who petitioned for more toll roads in Annapolis? Is that something that you would support?
Well, I haven't known anybody to petition for more toll roads, but the governor has put out a proposal to evaluate toll lanes on I-270, and I support that activity. I think whether that is successful or not will depend on what the toll itself is.
Sure, and what do you mean by that?
Well, a private company building a toll road is going to want to recover their cost, and they're going to want to charge a toll. So if the toll to drive from Frederick to the Beltway around DC is $5, that's one thing. If it's $35, it's another thing. So I think you have to look at what that toll is going to be as to whether it is a successful project or not. So really what their governor is doing first is gathering that information. So you can't really say yay or nay until you gather the information. So in Northern Virginia, they've built a lot of toll roads, and so it's the same model as that. And some of them have been successful, and some of them have had very high tolls, which has then brought a lot of public opposition.
Okay. And I wanted to go back a little bit because you mentioned, you know, leaving your role as commissioner in 2010. And at the time, was your thinking just that you had done all you could for the county?
I thought that I had accomplished what I'd set out to accomplish, that I had served as the president of the board. I'd been the president of the Maryland Association of Counties. Schools were well funded at the time. We had very competitive teacher salaries at the time, another thing that took a big step backwards in the following administration. And I thought it was time for somebody else to take a turn. So I do care very passionately about Frederick County and all of the good things that we do. I think most things are good in Frederick County. We have good schools. Our challenge is to keep them. I think we have some great job opportunities and job growth happening here. We have great amenities. We have great libraries and parks. We have beautiful natural environment, and we need to protect it.
Okay. And what did you do in the interim between 2010 and your run for county executive?
I worked for U.S. Senator Barbara Mikulski. I was her state director, which means I was her district director, but for a U.S. Senator, their district is an entire state. So I knew the state fairly well from being the president of the Maryland Association of Counties, but I got to know the state even better in that role. And I went into DC and worked on Capitol Hill about 1 day a week. And so I got a little bit of a taste for how the federal government works as well. And that's really very different from local government.
How so?
Well, here in local government, people have access to us. They see us in the grocery store. They can come into a public meeting. We're very accessible to people. It's a little bit different in Congress. Their hearings are a little bit, don't embrace the public in quite the same way. People obviously can't go there as frequently. And you're one of a larger group of people. So your individual role is often diminished in that larger crowd of elected officials. Senator McCauley, of course, had a position of power when she chaired the Appropriations Committee. And she had, there is an example of where experience really helped her to get things done for the state of Maryland.
And what was the biggest lesson you learned in your foray into federal politics?
The biggest lesson that I learned, wow, that's a hard one. I have to think about that for a minute. I'm not quite sure what I'd say the biggest lesson would be.
Did you take anything back when you came back to do county government?
What do you mean take it back? I took back all of the knowledge and all of the relationships and that I had built and acquired over that period of time. So it does help to know how things get done because it's better. You have a better capability to get something accomplished if you understand how the system works than if you don't. And one of the best things I learned from Senator McCauley was that she would often say, seize your power. You have the power of an individual to make great change. And that really fits into what I talked about before when I was a citizen participating in it. Individual people can make a big difference. Individual elected officials can make a big difference. And so she would say, seize your power, use it, and make a difference for people. And she never really forgot where she came from. She came from Baltimore City, and she came from a hardworking family. She always supported the working person and really kept that perspective the entire time, which I have to say I really admire because people sometimes do forget where they came from and how they grew up and don't use the lessons of their life for the future. So, but the number one big thing is really hard to come up with. So, but really, just seize your power and do it.
And are there any other political figures who have inspired you in your time in office?
Sure. I was always, one of the first people who mentored me was Delegate Sue Hecht, former Delegate Sue Hecht. And she was always optimistic and powerful and, never gave up on things, but always try to find, if this way didn't work, she'd try to work another way. And so I've always admired her, and she always supported me and gave me advice back in the early days of my career. And, I admire a lot of people who have been involved in politics. So when I was working for Senator McCauley, I was at an event one day where I was really just watching the event. Senator McCauley was participating in it. And so several of her staff were there. And somebody came up and stood beside me, and I looked over, and it was Joe Biden. And so I got to stand beside Joe Biden for about 15 minutes. I talked to him for a little bit, and that was pretty exciting. He comes off as a very real, average, everyday person when you meet him. So, so I had to call my mother on the train on the way home and say, Mom, I got to meet Joe Biden.
Do you remember what you talked about?
Not really. So, he asked me, who I was, who I worked for, what I did. So it was more of a just chit chat.
Okay. And obviously in 2012, that was when Frederick County voted to transition to a charter government, and you came back and ran for county executive. And for you, what motivated that decision? Why did you want to come back?
Well, I did not participate locally for most of the time between 2010 and 2014. I had left by choice, and I thought I should let people make the decisions they were going to make. The decision that put me over the edge was the sale of Citizens in Montague. I actually attended that public hearing and spoke in opposition to it. And when we came to charter government, it was a new job. And I really wanted to come back and fix the things that I thought had been undone and done poorly in that time period. And I thought I was uniquely qualified to be the county executive. I really think the transition, again, you know, it was very difficult to transition from charter government, from county commissioner form of government to charter government. And I think bringing the knowledge of county government to the table to make that work internally and externally was very helpful. And so I do think if somebody had come in with no experience in local government, particularly here in Frederick County, that would have been a much more difficult and heavier lift. So most people think the transition went well and it went seamlessly, and they don't recognize the hard work that went into that. And that's a good thing, because that means we were successful at doing it.
And for people who might not know, explain the story behind Citizens in Montague and that potential sale.
Well, Citizens in Montague are a nursing home and an assisted living facility that have been owned and were operated by Frederick County. They first started back in the 70s, but the Montague property was sold to the county for a small sum from about 180 years ago, maybe 188 years ago. I'm not quite sure. I have to add the years up. But and it was had a deed covenant that it would be used in perpetuity for the care of the poor, and it was used in a lot of different ways over time. So Montague had been the Mental Health Institute. They actually called it the Loony Bin at one point in time. If you go back in history, that was the politically correct word choice. And it was the poorhouse. It was also used as a hospital. It was the African American hospital when African Americans were not allowed at Frederick Memorial Hospital. And in the 70s, the commissioners decided to use the property for a nursing home. And a lot of counties had nursing homes back then. And so the counties had a long tradition of providing a subsidized assisted living at the Montague home. And we are now back to doing that again. And many, many Frederick County families had had somebody in their family at Citizens or Montague, and they had felt they had good care. A lot of people want to make sure they have a safety net option within their own community. Seniors in particular really cared about it. Long-term residents really cared about it. And it was a very controversial issue for them to sell it. And they sold it at a huge financial loss to the county, which also made absolutely no sense. Had the sale gone through, we would have had to bring $7.5 million to the table, plus paid realtors' fees, millions of dollars. And then they agreed to spend $10 million for the care of the indigent elderly there for as long as they were there, which was actually paying more than it would cost to have taken care of them if we'd paid the private pay rate. So they made just terrible financial deals for the county. So actually saving Citizens in Montague and retaining it as county-owned facilities actually saved taxpayer money.
And how are you able to save it?
Well, we didn't have to sell it at a loss. So they agreed to sell it for less than was owed on the mortgage. So it'd be just like a short sale on your house. So if you sold your house for $10,000 less than the mortgage, you'd have to bring $10,000 to the table to pay off that mortgage. And so we would have had to have done that. And of course, there was no plan for that. There was nothing put aside in the budget for that. That was not talked about publicly. And they talked about the fact that the nursing homes lost money, consumed tax dollars. But we now have it operating in a financially sustainable way, where we take the revenue generated from the nursing home, which runs like any other nursing home, and we use it to subsidize the indigent elderly at Montague. So right now we have about 32 subsidized patients at Montague.
Okay, and it's interesting to me, why was Montague for you the breaking point?
Because we had spent a number of years talking about building new facilities. We'd had a long public process. It was something that we had a lot of support to do. We had built new facilities so that they could operate in a financially self-sustaining manner, and they never gave them a chance to try to do that. And they just discarded the value to the community. And Citizens in Montague are something we should be proud of.
And I wanted to, oh, I'm sorry.
You know, we take care of our own, we take care of our seniors, we take care of people who've outlived their money, and that's the only thing they've done. We take care of people who have been big contributors to our community, and we do it without investing a tax dollar. We do it in a self-sustaining way. So it's all good.
And I wanted to touch on that as well, or go further into that, because I know that when you were out on Federal Hill and working in Capitol Hill and getting that experience, Blaine Young took over as president of the Board of Commissioners. And there were a lot of decisions that were made that were controversial at the time. I'm thinking specifically to a decision to make English the official language of Frederick County. Of course, there was more rapid development than had been done under your tenure on Board of Commissioners. And I mean, just emotionally for you, what did it feel like to be living in Frederick County and seeing that happen?
Well, what he did was there was a lot of things that he did to undo county government that most people will never see. So, you know, they wanted to do mass privatization, even if it cost more. They diminished county employees. They fired a lot of people. They treated the employees of the county terribly. And that made me sad, because we have very hardworking, committed, dedicated county employees, many of whom live here in our county as well. And they treated them badly. And I really felt bad for that. They wasted money. They wasted money. And they gave away tens of millions of dollars to developers. Tens of millions of dollars. The financial damage that they've done to Frederick County, we could not have sustained that for another 4 years. And that makes me sad. They didn't fund schools 1 penny above maintenance of effort, which made our starting teacher salary fall to last in the state, meaning a starting teacher in Washington County, Allegheny County, and Garrett County to our west were paid more than a Frederick County teacher. It is hard to have outstanding public schools if you do not value your employees, meaning your teachers. So they did a lot of things that I thought were just financially terrible and bad public policy, and I really feel like I have stood in the gate against it.
And what was it like in 2014 running against Blaine Young?
Well, it was interesting because, first of all, he had a lot of money, so he outspent me 5-1, so that was one thing. And he was very boisterous and has a very strong personality. But I will tell you, when I went out in the community and knocked on doors, there were a lot of people who were angry with him for one thing or another. And so it was a difficult campaign. It was an emotionally challenging campaign. But I really did feel I had the support of the community behind me the entire time.
And did his approach towards government and politics inform the candidate that you wanted to be?
I am who I am, and you know, I've always valued honest government. I've always valued people being able to participate in government, because that is how I came into it. And again, I believe one person can make a difference in what happens here locally. We can see many examples of that. And and I'll always protect taxpayers. You know, I would never do any of these bad financial deals that were done by that board. And a lot of people felt like, oh, well, they were, conservatives and going to protect taxpayers and save money. I mean, they actually raised taxes. They raised property taxes in 2013 by 4.5 pennies for most of the rural residents of this community, and told people they didn't do that when they actually did do it. And so they would put things on the agenda that did one thing, and they would say they did something else. It was just astounding. So they did a lot of things in plain sight, and that just went unnoticed and unreported.
Mm-hmm. And when you took office in 2014, even the first few months of your tenure as county executive were overshadowed by a Blaine Young scandal when he announced that he had had a relationship with a county budget officer. And what was that like for you? Was that frustrating?
Well, most of us who were engaged in the campaign knew that that was a reality that was already happening, so that was not a new piece of news to me. I think when he appointed himself to the Planning Commission, I think that took a lot of chutzpah on his part, and so I was very aggressive in going to the Attorney General to undo that one. And I really felt that we needed to keep Blaine and some of his friends out of county government, because I think they really did things that were bad for county government. You know, again, spending money, the taxpayer giveaways, the lack of investment in education, and the devaluing of people everywhere. The devaluing of people is really bad. Frederick County is a caring community, and people here take care of each other, and I want to set this better tone for county government where, you know, we valued our employees, we valued the public, we valued people participating, and that we value taking care of each other and doing good things for our community. You know, whether it's good schools, safe communities, you know, public safety, or just other things that county government does, right down to plowing the roads. I mean, we still have fewer people in our highway crews than we had back in 2007 or 8.
And you know, I talk about Blaine Young only because even in your most recent campaign, you mentioned his actions as president of the Board of Commissioners, and you mentioned his administration. But do you think that now that that's almost 5 years ago, it's fair to keep going back to?
Well, I don't actually talk about him very much. I really talk about that administration more than I talk about other things. The DRAs that were signed, the Developer Rights and Responsibility Contracts, where development doesn't have to pay into transportation improvements, they zeroed that out, and where development can build even with whether schools are overcrowded or not. Those things will last for the next 20 or 30 years. And so those things are going to be talked about for the next 20 or 30 years because they will continue to be a greater financial challenge to the county budget over time, not less.
Okay. And has your attitudes towards development changed at all between 1998 when you first took office and today?
I think that I always wanted to make sure we had adequate schools and roads, and I still believe we should do that. And public safety has become a bigger issue. You know, we are adding more fire and EMS providers than ever before, and we need to make sure that we can answer the call to 911 from a staffing standpoint. So meeting the demands of a growing community are sometimes not widely recognized. So, you know, we have more students showing up in our schools every year, which we have to support with the whole, everything we support in education. We have more calls for service whether it's for fire or EMS service, and we have to make sure that we keep our community safe. That's a fundamental responsibility that we have. We have a growing senior population, so we have more people calling into what was the Department of Agency, and now is our Senior Services Division, whether it's for Meals on Wheels or help signing up for Medicare, or whatever the issues are. So the increasing population increases demand on everything that we do in county government. So how we manage our budget is also tied to how well we manage growth. So I also don't want the vision for the future of Frederick County to be just a bedroom community, the greater metropolitan areas. So I'm more focused on job growth and local job growth than I am on housing. We have a housing pipeline approved of like 20,000 houses. We know where it is. We have to do the infrastructure planning for that. We've done a plan for that. And so we don't really need to add to that because we need to kind of make sure we can execute that well. I think we need to accelerate ag preservation to make sure that we keep the agricultural heritage that people do love and appreciate in Frederick County. People love the history of our county and value that, and I think we need to make sure we do a bit more on the historic preservation front, particularly in our rural areas. And so I'm really more focused on jobs. When we talk about growth and development, we really don't need to add anything more to our housing pipeline, with some rare exceptions, like we may need some senior housing to meet that senior population, and we may need some more workforce housing.
And what would you say to people who would say that it's unrealistic to say that we don't need more housing in Frederick County, especially given the growth that you've mentioned?
Well, I would say that we have 20,000 houses that are already approved. Many of those approved during that Blaine Young administration period, and we need to be able to do that well. So we have right now about 96,000 houses in Frederick County, residential houses. And to have 20,000 more in the queue is a lot. It's going to meet the housing need of this community for a long time. And so I don't think we need to add more housing into that, with, again, the exception of some senior housing and affordable housing. And if you knock on doors, which I just did in Frederick County, the hottest topic is residential growth. So even people who support residential growth really say, why are you approving this if the schools aren't adequate? Why are you approving this if we don't improve the roads? And why isn't that happening? And part of that is because we have these DRAs, these 14 contracts for 14,400 of those 20,000 homes that doesn't require them to do those things. And that is something we are going to be living with for the next 20 or 30 years. So I think that trying to make sure we execute what's already in the pipeline has to be the first responsibility.
And given those, the lack of development scrutiny, of the previous administration, how do you, as county executive, make promises to hold developers accountable?
Well, we have already strengthened our adequate public facilities ordinance, but it only applies to new things, not to those 20,000 houses that were already approved and under contract, okay? So, we've put better public policy in place and laws in place going forward. I mean, the council repealed the law for developer rights and responsibilities agreements, so we're not doing them anymore. We're not doing any of these taxpayer giveaways anymore. And when I've had the opportunity, and the opportunity will present itself from time to time over the next 20 years, I have renegotiated better deals for the taxpayers of Frederick County.
Okay. And you mentioned Frederick County and preserving its heritage and preserving it as more than just a bedroom community. So, I mean, how would you describe the character of Frederick County and what it is?
I think Frederick County is the best place to live, work, and raise a family in the country. We really have something for everybody here. From a job standpoint, we have added 6,500 net new jobs over the last few years across 9 different industry sectors. And so we've created jobs to meet people of different skill levels and educational levels. And so that's really, we really have a strong and diverse economy. People like our history. Certainly we have an authentically historic downtown city of Frederick, which is very vibrant. And that is a real asset to our community. It's an envy of mid-sized towns in America because it really is a very beautiful and functional downtown. And we are trying hard to support our agricultural community economically. I did add an agricultural economic development specialist. We've seen growth in agritourism. There's opportunities with wineries, breweries, and distilleries, and there's opportunities for farmers to grow things like hops, which really isn't happening in a big way yet, but I think that is an opportunity that's out there. Traditional agriculture, right now, the commodity prices for milk are terrible. So, people can't recover their cost to produce 100 hundredweight of milk. That's a huge problem for people who have traditionally been in dairy farming. So we're going to have to be more aggressive in allowing diversification and supporting diversification of farm operations. And it is going to be something I talk about because agriculture is important to our community and it's important to our small towns because the economy of a lot of those small towns and villages have really been around agriculture. So as agriculture goes, so does the economic health of these smaller communities. So it is something that I take seriously that we have to work on. There's places for people to live here. They can live in the city in an urban kind of setting. They can live in suburbia, and they can live in a rural area. We have great amenities for recreation, really very close by, right here in the community. With our county parks, our state and federal parks, and we have, I think, some of the best public libraries that are anywhere. And we have, over 1 million people a year come into our public library, so they're very well used, and they respect our history. We always incorporate history into our new libraries. So I think Frederick County is a great place to live. We have great schools, which are the foundation of our future economic prosperity, because you have to have that workforce. And I think we have a really growing life science biotech industry here. And some of that is affiliated with the work at Fort Detrick. Some of it is not so much, but we're getting to be known for that. I mean, it'd be very exciting if Frederick County becomes the place where we cure cancer and cure other diseases. And that possibility really exists here. And so I think it's wonderful that people can have good jobs and it can do something good for the world, improving public health.
Okay. And I wanted to go back to the issue of agriculture because I know that right now Frederick County has preserved about 60,000 acres of farmland.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And right now that's been kind of done in a piecemeal approach. But do you think that there's room for a more holistic agricultural plan like Montgomery County where you have large swaths of preserved agricultural areas?
Well, Montgomery County has an ag reserve, which is different. We certainly haven't done ag preservation piecemeal. We have defined priority preservation areas and rural legacy areas. So we have tried to do blocks of agriculture. One of the things that's different about Montgomery County and Baltimore County and some of the other areas, they had their kind of urban area in one place and then they had their agricultural area in another. We have our urban area in the center, and we have municipalities kind of all over the place. So our ag is kind of surrounding some of those areas. So doing exactly what Montgomery County has done is not something we can definitely replicate. But in my next term, one of my priorities is to punch up ag preservation, because I think that is part of growth management. It's also part of leaving that legacy and agricultural heritage to future generations, which I think is important. And I think we do have to protect blocks of agriculture. And then I want to do some things to protect our environmentally sensitive areas like Sugarloaf Mountain and maybe some parts of the Catoctin Mountains.
Okay. And in this most recent election in 2018, what was it like running against Kathy Afzali? Because I was wondering if it changed your campaign or the way that you approached voters at all.
Well, every campaign has a different dynamic. And so running as an incumbent is different than running as not being the incumbent, so that's a bit different. I don't think I ran any differently against her because she was another woman, if that is where you're going with that question. But she actually tried to pick up a lot of my issues and the things that I've done over the years. And so we had some overlapping goals and objectives. I thought there was, unfortunately, a lot of negative campaigning, a lot of things that were said that were just not true, and unfortunately that's where campaigning has gone.
Is that something that you try to avoid?
I try to avoid that, yes. So I try to have a message and stick with it.
And a lot of your biggest issues in office have been related to land use, as you've kind of alluded to, including the Monocacy Scenic River Plan. And that was a big issue earlier in October, and I was wondering where your feelings on the plan now stand.
Well, I think, again, this is the Monocacy River Plan. I've really had no role in it. Okay? Under charter government, I'm the executive. I'm not the legislative body, so it hasn't been to me. So the River Board itself wrote the plan. I didn't even know they were working on it until they actually released their first draft. And so I've tried to make sure that there's been a good public process. You know, I wanted to make sure we notified property owners who would be affected, just like we notified property owners this week of the FEMA floodplain maps, even though that's being done by the federal government, and so that people can be aware of it and participate in it. I've had no role in it, really, up to this point. Until the county council adopts it or doesn't adopt it, it doesn't come to me.
But could county staff have reviewed the plan faster?
County staff reviewed the plan in the customary time frame that they review every other plan. I mean, we've been doing Livable Frederick, which is one of my initiatives, for about 2.5 years. So normally these boards and commissions meet once a month, they make recommendations, staff rewrites it and brings it back to them the next month. And that's exactly what we've done with the Monocacy River Plan. And they made well over 100 changes. And not only does it require rewriting sentences and redrafting, it requires reformatting.
Do you have a personal opinion on the plan and whether or not it should pass in its current format?
I have not read the current format, so I'm waiting to see what the final plan looks like. I do hope that the county council and Carroll County will come together to adopt a single plan.
Okay. And I think that philosophically, the Scenic River Plan brings up a lot of questions about property owner rights. And philosophically, I was wondering which you think is more important, property owner rights or larger issues like public access and ecological management?
Well, if you want, I think you have to balance those things together, and I think what we do in everything we do in county government is balance legitimate competing interests. Okay, so there's always people with different opinions, and we try to balance them on every issue that comes to us. So if you're into pure property rights, you would have no zoning ordinance at all. Okay, because then everybody could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted it. And you would have, and some there are places in our country with no zoning, so you have a gas station beside a house, and you have a mix of uses together. So we, some of that may be more compatible than others. So I think we do want to respect people's property rights. Certainly, I think there was legitimate concern over the proposed buffer area that came from the River Board itself. That was removed, a 1.5 to 2 years ago. I think wordsmithing things like changing river corridor to river area, I think that pretty much says the same thing. So that is not a property rights issue, in my opinion. So I just think it's a balance. I think we have to protect the water quality and we have to balance property rights. There's certainly no interest in county government taking anyone's property. We have always purchased property when we wanted to build a road or a school or a library or anything else. And so, we talked about the water lines, the Potomac, that's 13 miles long. We negotiated easements with all those property owners. We didn't condemn anybody's property. We didn't take anybody's property. We paid for it all.
Okay. And give us a little bit of a preview. I was wondering what the 3 biggest issues you're looking forward to most.
Well, my priorities in my current term have been education, jobs, community needs, and seniors. And I'll continue to carry those forward, okay? We have accomplished many of the things we set out to do in those 4 areas. One of my priorities is going to be advancing livable Frederick, which will have a process before the new county council. I expect that the Planning Commission will be done with it in December, but it could go into January because, again, that's the Planning Commission's ultimate decision. And so hopefully in the next year they will deliver and adopt some version of livable Frederick. And that is a comprehensive plan, but it's also a master plan for the community. So it really encompasses a lot of goals and action plans, and it will be the umbrella for moving forward for the future of Frederick County. So all the things I just talked about, education, jobs, community needs, all will fit underneath that. Seniors, we even have some health components there. So it's a very different and more comprehensive plan, and it will provide the framework for what we do in the future. And it will ensure that we have a prosperous future in my view. So I think it's really a bit unique. It's really more comprehensive than what we've done in the past. It's really had a great public process. So livable Frederick is one of my priorities. I also want to eliminate school overcrowding. We, again, had severe school overcrowding recreated by the prior administration, and we've made good progress on it, but I think we will complete that. And we've put good public policy in place going forward as well so that we don't recreate it again. And of course, future elected officials can always undo some of that, but that's another one of my priorities, is to eliminate school overcrowding. And then I really want to jumpstart agricultural preservation, protection of historic resources in our more rural areas, and protecting some of our environmentally sensitive areas, which will be partly implemented through livable Frederick.
Okay. And I think before we move on to the fun questions, I just wanted to ask you, looking back in your tenure as a Frederick County politician, what's the single biggest challenge you think that you've had to face?
Well, I think that probably the single biggest challenge has been this heroin and opioid addiction, and we're trying to deal with that with the RFP for standing up a detox facility. And so our goal was to reduce the fatalities by 10% over the last 4 years, and we have not achieved that. And it really isn't heroin anymore, it's really fentanyl. So the drugs have become stronger. But that has real devastating implications for the future of our community and the future of our country, and we really need to be more aggressive in trying to solve it, and it's easier said than done.
Mm-hmm. And was there a moment as a politician when you looked at this epidemic and you thought, wow, like this is a big recurring issue?
I have known people who have had family members die from drug overdoses, and so I've seen the pain of that up close and personal. And I worry about something that no one ever talks about, and that is children who are growing up in homes where their parents are drug addicted. And we want to make sure we have hope for recovery for those parents, but we have some children who are really experiencing an adverse childhood experience from that environment. And we need to make sure that we protect the next generation.
And what's the timeline on the proposed detox center, do you think?
We got bids in yesterday, and so we will see what we got. I can't tell you the answer to that yet. And hopefully we will move forward with something in the next year. So I'm hopeful that we will, again, lead the way in the state. Frederick County is very innovative. We do some things really well, better than anybody else. We're leading the way in the state with the LINKS program at Frederick High School, which is innovation in public education. We're leading the way with this detox center. We're leading the way with creating jobs with what we've done at Root and with our second incubator in downtown City Frederick and putting all those partners together. We're leading the way with workforce training and putting the community college together with workforce development. And so we actually do some things very well here in Frederick County. We're going to lead the way with the implementation of next generation 911 communications, which people are going to see happen over the next 4 years. So we do a lot of things very well here, and we're a great place to live. We have great schools. We really just need to keep it going.
And in your 4 years as county executive, your first 4 years, do you think that you had any failures?
Well, I think sometimes you can't put things back together again the way they were before. So I think that's a challenge. And I think that we've had not done some of the things I would have done on growth management because they've been challenging to get through the county council. School mitigation fees being one of them.
Okay, great. Well, I'd like to move on to some lighter questions.
Okay.
I was wondering, are you ready for that?
I hope so.
Okay.
I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, well, I'm not going to ask your birthday, but first of all, what astrological sign are you?
I am a Libra.
You're a Libra?
Yeah, which is well balanced, so I'm right in the right category for the job I have.
And are you a dog or a cat person?
Oh, well, I'm allergic to cats, so I'd have to say I'm a dog person.
You really? Do you have any dogs at home?
I don't have any pets right now because I am not home. Okay.
What about pie or cake? Where do you stand on the pie or cake divide?
Pie.
Pie?
I make a mean apple pie.
Really? What's
Yeah.
your recipe? What's your secret?
It's my mother's recipe, but I make homemade crust and I make everything from scratch.
Okay. If you could have dinner with 3 people, living or dead, who would they be?
Oh, wow. Living or dead? Wow. So I think it'd be interesting to have dinner with President Obama. I think that would be cool. So, oh my goodness, there's a lot of people I could think of on this list. It's hard to shorten it down. So I think I'd love to talk to somebody like Martin Luther King and talk about his life experiences and what he thinks about where we are today. I think that would be very interesting. And you know, part of it is I'd like to go back and have dinner with my grandparents.
Oh, really? And are they which side?
My mother's parents in particular.
Okay. I was wondering if you could tell me about your favorite book of all time.
Oh, gee. I do read a lot. I'm not sure what my favorite book of all time is. I used to like to read Robert Mitchell books. So I don't know. I don't know what my favorite book of all time is because I just have read so many good books.
What about your favorite movies? Do you have 3 Desert Island movies?
No.
What's one of your favorite movies?
I like, oh geez, I can't think of the, Pretty Woman is one of my favorite movies. I think that's just a great movie. It's a fairy tale story, so I always like that movie to watch. I find that to be fun. So, but if I had to pick 3, I have to tell you I probably watch 1 movie a year, so I'm not really a movie person.
What was the last movie you watched?
I don't remember. I probably haven't watched a movie in the last year.
Wow.
So I work all the time.
Okay.
So I do not watch very many movies. So I can't even remember the last movie that I watched.
So what are your biggest hobbies outside the office then?
Well, I like to cook, and I like to read.
Okay. And do you have a go-to dish that you're known for?
I have a number of go-to dishes that I'm good for. So I have a chicken recipe that my kids fondly call chicken with goop that is a favorite. And believe it or not, I know that sounds weird.
What is it?
It's chicken with broccoli, and it has a sauce over the top, and I serve it with rice. And so they like it.
Okay.
It's a childhood comfort food that my kids like, okay? And so, well, you're asking me a fun question. So, but I like to cook all kinds of things. So I like to cook meatloaf. I love meatloaf. I know that sounds weird too, probably. That's one of my favorite foods. And I'm a baker, so I like to make pies. I don't really make too many cakes because my husband doesn't eat them.
Really?
Yeah.
Have you confronted him about that?
No, he likes pie. So I don't want to, I'm not saying he hates cake, but he prefers other things. So pie and cookies are good.
Okay. What's your alcoholic drink of choice?
Probably beer.
Beer? Do you have a favorite brewery?
I probably frequently drink Flying Dog.
Okay.
So numero uno is probably one of my favorites. I am a beer snob.
Really?
I like to drink beer in a bottle.
Okay.
I can never drink beer out of a can. Don't ask me why, it's just not right. So, and I do like a lot of the craft beers.
Okay. And do you have a favorite restaurant in Frederick?
Oh, we have a lot of good restaurants in Frederick. I like to go to the Orchard for lunch, so that's one of my faves. I like to go to JoJo's. I like to go to the tasting room. So there's quite a few on the list.
Okay. Who was your celebrity crush growing up?
Oh, geez. I probably had a few celebrity crushes. I'm not sure I can remember their names, though. So, you know, all the boy bands, the Monkees, all those people.
And what do you think are 2 facts your constituents don't know about you?
Well, I don't think my constituents know a lot of things about me. I mean, I don't even think they know much about my family. But so what are the 2 unique things that I think people don't know about me?
Yeah, if you had to pick 2.
I don't know what people don't know about me. I feel like people know me everywhere. People feel like they know me because a lot of people call me by my first name when I'm out and about, so they feel like they know me. I think they don't really probably know where I grew up, and you know that I grew up in a small town, America. They probably don't know that about me, and they probably don't know that I like to be happy and sing, and my favorite thing is parades. I love parades.
Really? Like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade? Did you watch
Yeah,
it?
but I like being in parades.
How many parades have you been in?
Lots of parades. There's lots of parades in Frederick County, and so, you know, we have the Brunswick Veterans Day Parade. A lot of the fire companies have parades. Thurmont has a big parade. So Middletown has Heritage Day parades. So there's a lot of parades. I like to be in parades. They're fun.
Okay.
They're great fun. So.
And you mentioned you don't think that people know about your family, so can you talk about your family a little bit?
Well, I've been married to my husband, John, for 35 years.
Wow.
So that's a long time, and he's very supportive of what I do. So he's very much all in and cares about Frederick County. He gets to hear about it pretty much every day, whether he's interested in hearing about it or not. And I have 3 adult children. So I have a son who's an electrical engineer, and he's married and I also have 1 grandchild. He's not yet 1. And he's the cutest baby ever. And I have a daughter who lives here in Frederick County. She's a cardiac ICU nurse, and I think she is just really a skilled nurse and a very empathetic person. So I really admire the work that she does for people who are very, very sick. And then my youngest daughter is probably in some ways the craziest of my children, and she is a pediatric physical therapist.
Wow.
And so, but she always comes up with something goofy that she wants us to do.
Like what?
Well, she and my husband have been running races. So my husband the last couple of years has started running. So they just ran a half marathon together the weekend before Thanksgiving.
Wow.
And you know, she wants us to go rock climbing, and she'll drag us to fun things that I would not normally do.
Are you afraid of heights?
Yes.
Really? Is that your greatest fear?
I do not like flying, and I do fly because I want to go certain places, so I do get on a plane and fly, but I have an unusual fear of flying. And my husband said it's because I'm not flying the plane, I'm not in control. I like to be, I'm a control freak, I want to control it, and I'm not in control. But I also feel like, you know, you're 30,000 feet up in the air, and it's like being in a tin can.
Yeah, I don't really believe that airplanes can fly. Every time I get on a plane, I don't think it should be possible. And how did you and your husband meet?
We met at Quaker Oats at work.
Was there a love story? What was the story?
When I worked for Quaker Oats in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, there were a lot of young people there. They actually had a wave of hiring of young people. So we socialized together and played volleyball and all those kinds of things. So we had a lot of activities that we did together. So that's how I met him.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you remember how he asked you out?
Yeah. I don't know that I want to talk about that. That's too personal. So he asked me out on a date, and my parents were coming to town, so our first date was he came to my house, and I had all these friends over to meet for dinner and to meet my parents. So he got to meet my parents on his first date.
Oh my gosh. Was he?
And he's still here.
Did your parents like him?
Yes. So my parents are really very nice people. So my dad has a great sense of humor. He's always had a great sense of humor. I spent my childhood laughing at the dinner table because my dad always has something funny to say. He still does. And my mother's been in charge.
Okay. Is that an approach you like to take in life too?
Yes, I'm used to being in charge. So the women are clearly in charge in my family, but my mother is still in charge. So when my parents had their 50th anniversary, my dad said, I want all you kids to know I'm going to be in charge now. Your mother was in charge for the first 50 years, now it's my turn. We thought that'll last about a week. That's about how long it'll last, maybe 2.
Okay, 2 weeks is pretty good though. Do you have siblings?
Yes, so I have an older sister who works for the University of Pittsburgh. She lives in Pittsburgh, obviously. I have a brother that lives in Kansas City and a brother that lives in California.
Okay, and are your brothers younger or older?
Younger.
Okay, so you're really the middle child.
I'm the second out of 4, yeah.
Do you think you identify with middle child syndrome?
A little bit.
A little bit? Okay.
So, yeah, my older sister always told us what to do. And for some unknown reason, we would listen to her most of the time, which I don't really know. But why that is. But yeah, so I had a happy childhood. I have a stable family. My parents have been married 68 years.
Wow.
And so we all go on vacation every summer together, all of us and all the grandkids and all the other extended family. So there's over 20 of us. We go on vacation together and we all get together for the week after Christmas. Okay. So everybody will be here.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Where is the last place you vacationed?
We often rent a house in the Outer Banks. Because we can rent a big house, we stay in one house and we always eat in.
Okay. Have you traveled outside the country at all?
Very little. So one of our daughters did a semester abroad in Copenhagen, Denmark. Oh, wow. And so we went to visit her, and that is actually the only time I've been in Europe.
Wow.
So my children are all more traveled than I am.
Once you retire, would you like to go to Europe?
I would like to do a little more traveling. One of the best trips we took was to Alaska, and we did that a couple years ago, and I thought that was really something worth seeing. It's a very different environment. We went to Denali, and we also did a cruise portion, so that was nice to go see all the glaciers. So very interesting. So lots of places I'd like to go. Okay.
And Jen, you've been so nice to give me so much of your time, and I think the only other question I have for you is where you see yourself in 10 years.
I see myself retired in 10 years. So honestly, I do, because I'm 62 years old now, so in 10 years I'll be 72. So I will tell you that I really love being the county executive. I really think it's very meaningful work. Every day is different. I have an opportunity to meet wonderful people individually, learn about wonderful businesses and wonderful things people are doing. We really have an amazingly creative and innovative and interesting community, and I think it's a job that I am meant to do. And so I love being the county executive. Of course, we have term limits. So I am termed out after this next term, and so, you know, hopefully I will have somebody good come in behind me. I'll always be engaged in the community, so I'll always volunteer and do something meaningful in Frederick County because it is a community that I'm vested in, and I'm vested in a big way. I really do care about it. So, you know, I did have a hard time watching some of the dismantling of some of the things I cared about during a time when I was away. So hopefully I will never see that again, and we will see people continue to want to do good things for Frederick County and make sure we have a prosperous future, because I think we really do have a great place to live.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.